Howdy, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Okayest Trapper Podcast. As always, we are brought to you by MountainToughFitness.com. And if you've ever fallen off your New Year's resolution, this is the time that it happens. So it's not too late to redeem yourself by getting into the best shape of your life now. With workouts tailored for the outdoor enthusiasts, Mountain Tough Fitness will have you hauling steel wherever you need to. So go check them out and use the promo code OKS30, all caps, for a 30-day free trial. Now, today's guest is someone I have been looking forward to chatting with. This gentleman is a third-generation trapper and can claim that his son and granddaughter as fourth and fifth generation trappers, respectively. He's the shop foreman at a welding shop in southern New Mexico and the co-owner of Triangle 5 Bar Rodeo Company. He grew up working ranches and was even a bareback bronc rider for his alma mater, New Mexico State University. And if all of that wasn't enough, he is also the president of the New Mexico Trappers Association. Chance Thedford, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. I've been listening to these podcasts. I think I'm caught up now, but I like what you're doing, and they're very entertaining and very informational, and I appreciate what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that as well. And, Chance, we have a lot to talk about as it relates to the loss of public land trapping rights in New Mexico. But before we get there, which we'll spend a lot of the show talking about, you're a third generation trapper. And as far as you've been told, you were actually conceived on your dad's trap line. So without going maybe back that far, can you recount the earliest memory you've ever had on a trap line?
Oh yeah, that's easy. I think I was about 6 years old, maybe, running trap line with my dad. And I guess, I started setting smaller traps at that time. He was mainly a bobcat, fox, coyote trapper. We were in Arizona at that time. So that'd have been about 1976. I remember running at line with him. We'd trap some in the high desert and also up in the mountains quite a lot.
And, if you think about that as you as a kid, oftentimes kids kind of rebel against what their parents do. It sounds like your kids, your grandkids are kind of right in line with following this type of lifestyle. Do you remember what it was that captured you and made you want to continue trapping throughout your life?
Well, my whole life, I guess I really don't know a whole lot of anything different. I grew up, we were trapping, working cows with my dad, very involved in the agricultural industry growing up. So I guess my life's never really been anything different, and I wouldn't change a thing. I don't have any regrets as far as that goes. I don't regret not being a corporate guy or something like that. It doesn't bother me one bit. I'm very thankful for the life I have.
Yeah, you could be a corporate stiff like me that's now trying to redeem themselves and get their hands a little bit dirtier. You definitely had the right lifestyle lined up for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, and like I said, it's multi-generational. My granddad was a government trapper, and when his dad died, he took over his dad's farm. And when my dad, so my dad grew up trapping with my grandpa. And when my dad got home from Vietnam, he was a contract trapper for a lot of people in Arizona. And yeah, so me growing up, of course, I got away from it for a long time through my teenage years and my 20s and part of my 30s before I actually came back to trapping again. I was rodeoing and things like that. So yeah, I had no regrets, none.
Can you maybe, as we frame up the evolution of trapping like in Arizona and New Mexico, so you were around it active in the 70s when you were a kid, around your dad, stepped away for a while, but that was kind of during the big fur boom, wasn't it? Like,
Oh yeah.
what was the atmosphere around trapping like back in New Mexico and Arizona and just the Southwest in general back then?
Oh, back then there was a lot of trappers back then. A lot of people grew up trapping. Unfortunately, these days people don't. That's, in my opinion, that's one of our biggest problems, and why we're fighting so hard to live the life we want to live is because people have gotten away from their agricultural roots.
And I'm finding my unmute button, but uh, when do you think the tide started to turn? So you stepped away, you were doing a lot of rodeoing through the 90s and early 2000s before you kind of stepped back into trapping more fully. Like, was there any one event where things started to shift and change away from that agricultural lifestyle where people were more exposed, or was it just a slow, steady march towards stepping out of the woods essentially?
Oh, it's been a slow, steady march out of it. And, I can tell you a memory, and it's kind of funny. I think back on it now and think about the ignorance of being a young man. I remember my granddad and my dad talking about, I guess this was late, I think it was probably about 88, 89. So I was about 18, 19 years old and knew everything there was to know about anything. And I remember my dad and my grandpa talking, and my grandpa was talking about them trying to ban trapping in California. And I remember thinking at the time, being the kid I was, this is the Southwest. That's never going to happen. That's never going to happen, right? And here we are, all these years later, and sure enough, and it wasn't long after that I heard them during that conversation that they lost trapping in California.
Do you remember what year that was by chance?
Like, I think, and I could be wrong. I know it was in the 90s, but it was in the mid 90s. Actually, one of my board members was a trapper in California at the time, and he was one of the guys on the front lines fighting it, and he could tell you exactly when it happened. But I believe it was maybe 93 to 96 in there somewhere. I think it was earlier though, about 93.
So was that like the first big, like we talked about, from the fur boom of the 70s, 80s up through the 90s, you start to see this slow march away from agricultural activities, maybe away from trapping. And then the California trapping ban hits. Was that kind of like the first flash that was like, oh man, like there are people out there actively trying to kill this lifestyle?
Oh, I believe so. I believe that wholeheartedly. And I'm pretty sure California was the first state to lose it. And I've heard from a lot of people that anything that happens in California, it's like a effect, and it has a tendency to move to the east.
Yeah, and we've seen that in a lot of different elements over the past few years. So in New Mexico, you're in New Mexico when the California ban happened, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so from the time that California banned trapping, and I don't know what elements, I don't know if it's like Oregon where it was all body gripping traps, or if it's like New Mexico now where it's all public land trapping, but they banned trapping to a pretty severe extent. What does the face of trapping look like in New Mexico from that point in the late 90s up until a year or two ago when everything happened in New Mexico where public land trapping rights have been stripped away?
Well, actually 1980 was the first year we even had trapping rules in New Mexico, and New Mexico Trappers Association, we're the ones that actually pushed for what regulations they were up until the trapping ban, and which are still in effect now. But it's like I said, I mean, people moving away from that lifestyle, it just progressed. It just keeps progressing, and that's how we ended up where we're at now, I believe.
And, for me, I'll tell a little story about how I first heard about everything going on in New Mexico. I mean, Chance, I know you and I have talked. I'm not a multi-generational trapper. My parents didn't hunt or trap. I'm new as an adult learning this. So I started to get involved with my association in my state of Idaho. And then, people start to tell a cautionary tales, like, oh, don't share this, don't share that. Like, we have to be cautious about protecting our trapping rights. And as somebody new, it was always a little confusing to me. I'm like, well, what are we talking about? Like, trapping rights aren't going away. And then all of a sudden, people point to New Mexico and they're like, look what's happening in New Mexico. And you're like, oh my God, like, yes, these things can happen. So
Yeah,
maybe for people who are like
yeah,
me stepping in later in life,
yeah.
can you tell me exactly what happened in New Mexico?
We would hear on the news, papers that people's dogs were getting trapped, this, that, and the other, and that went on for years. And as a side note, we did lose trapping in 2021, but what a lot of people don't know is we were fighting this for 20 years before that and won over and over and over again. But the one incident that happened was in northwestern New Mexico. A guy caught a dog in a snare, and the owner couldn't get the snare off quick enough, and the dog ended up dying. Well, upon investigation with the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, they go in and they check things out. Well, this guy wasn't a trapper, and I want to state that he was a poacher. I don't even know that he had a trapping license. I'm not sure, but every set he had out there was illegal. He wasn't checking traps on we have a daily check law in New Mexico. He wasn't doing that. There was that guy. I don't think he hardly did anything legal, but here we are. Who gets to pay for it? Everybody. The 99% of trappers that do everything by the law.
And when you have something like that, that's so, well, heartbreaking, and it's also a very hard thing to defend, right? Even though this person was poaching and not doing things legally, and the rest of the trapping population ends up paying. But from the time that dog was caught and the time that dog unfortunately passed due to an illegal snare, how quickly was it that the rug was pulled up? Like, and I want you to help paint a picture of like how legislation works too. Like, was it somebody got their dog caught, they complain to a senator, the senator goes, you know what, I'm going to propose a bill gets passed, trapping rights, like, or is it different? Like, what does that look like in reality?
Yeah, I mean, there was that, but the corporate media in New Mexico hit it as hard as they could. Um, Going back, New Mexico has always been a Democrat-run state. So the media is going to lean that way very hard. They do nationwide. I mean, anybody that watches mainstream media knows that. Well, New Mexico's as bad, if not worse. So they jumped all over it. Well, of course, every senator in the state of New Mexico is going to see that. And that gave a big boost to groups like Center for Biological Diversity, Trap Free New Mexico. I mean, there's probably a dozen of those groups around here. They jumped on it really hard. But like I said, we were fighting it 20 years before that incident happened. That incident was basically the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. That's what really set everything on fire.
And then But from the time that that event happened and the fire was set, was that like 2019, 2018? Like from the time that everything got pulled, and I think you said 2021. What was that time frame
Yeah,
like?
I would say 2 to 3 years, if I'm
Okay.
remembering right. But yeah, it wasn't long.
And then what is the actual language in the band? Because it's interesting from being an outsider looking in. Like I look at what like the New Mexico Trappers Association fur sale. Like there's people down there selling fur, trapping fur, but is it just public land trapping? Like can you do private land trapping, and kind of talk through like what the actual bill that was introduced and passed states for New Mexico?
So we're allowed to trap private land. Um, Me personally, I trap on a ranch. I'm behind lock gates when I'm coyote trapping, and of course I trap skunks a lot for farmers around here too. So it's all private property. Yeah, there is zero trapping on public land. Like Arizona and Colorado, you can cage trap bobcats on public. You cannot do that here. And what a lot of people don't know is with this bill, with the passage of it, they they hamstrung the department, the game and fish severely. And as far as wildlife services go, they're pretty much under the same rules I am. So it's a big hit for our state, and our ranchers suffer the most because ranchers lease a huge amount of land in the state of New Mexico. We lost 68% of the state with that ban. And, like most ranchers in this state, they have maybe say they have 600 acres of private land. Well, they may be leasing 10,000 acres, running cattle on it, having heifers out there calving, or, Lord forbid you're a sheep man, you're really in trouble then. And there are sheep ranchers in New Mexico. So, yeah, that's who suffers the most. But the language in the bill, basically the only people that can trap public land in the state of New Mexico are Native Americans who are members of a federally recognized Indian tribe, and they can only do it for ceremonial purposes.
Wow. And from like being on the ground, like what's the impact? Like I can say from outside looking in, like I've met trappers from New Mexico who are making a living or a big chunk of their living off of public land trapping, and now I've had to move out of the state. But
Oh, yeah.
is it livestock depredation? Is it the loss of income for trappers? Like what do the impacts actually look like, especially being the president of New Mexico Trappers Association? Like what's the trickle down effect that you're seeing of this bill being passed?
Yeah, and that's mainly it. Anybody that's trapped for any length of time knows that trapping is actually good for the ungulates, ground nesting birds, um, and it's good for the coyotes, the bobcats, the animals we trap. Because when you start thinning those numbers out, you're way less likely to have disease. The food source becomes more abundant. It improves their habitat. I've seen that firsthand. So already we're starting to see a huge uptick in rabies. I expect parvo, distemper. The list is endless of things that are going to increase. It will happen. It happened in California. We saw that, and it's going to do nothing but get worse. The county immediately north of me, where I grew up, and the county northwest of me last week already saw bobcats with rabies.
Hmm.
And of course, coyotes also. And we have a huge problem, and we've had it for quite a long time. In the whole eastern side of the state, coyotes are horrible with mange. So trappers were at least taking some of those out, taking a huge number of those out, and that's gone away now. And we saw, if you look at Southern California and the mange and coyotes, it's just horrible because it doesn't get cold enough to kill them there. They don't freeze to death and they survive it. So the disease just keeps spreading and spreading and spreading.
Yeah, but that's one of the, if I had to choose a way to personally go, it would not be by mange, and especially in mild temperatured or cold temperatured areas.
Yeah.
That is not a good way to go.
It has to be miserable.
And that's one of the things. And so I actually have a question that I was going to pose later. It's one I pose to all guests, but I think this is a good opportunity to slip it in, which is, in your view, being around trapping for as long as you have been, what do you think is the biggest misconception by the general public about trapping as a whole?
That one's easy. They believe we just go set traps wherever, whenever, however we want. They don't understand that we are the most regulated group that uses the outdoors, period. Besides maybe ranchers. But as far as outdoorsmen go, we are by far the most regulated. And when you ask people, do you approve of trapping? And they say no. And you say, well, do you approve of regulated trapping? Well, yeah, I guess I could go along with that, which tells me they have no idea that we have rules to follow.
Mm-hmm. And very strict rules too.
Yeah, exactly. In New Mexico, we have a test you have to take to get a trapper's license. And I don't know how many pages it is. It's based off the OFWA test. And then at the end of it, there's another couple pages that are New Mexico specific, mainly dealing with what the rules are and species identification. So, I mean, you have to take a test to hunt lions here too, but it's like maybe 3 questions, I think. Which I mean, trust me, I'm not knocking that at all. It's a good test, and it needs to be there so you can tell the difference between a male and a female lion. But I'm just saying, nobody else has to go through what we have to go through to be able to do what we want to do and need to do.
And presumably then for people who are trapping private land in New Mexico, all of the existing regulations are in place. None of that changed with the passing of this law that banned public land trapping, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So I have a very big question for you, and I think it's going to be twofold. So it's going to take us down 2 paths. So I'm going to ask the easier question first, which is, what can other states be doing to proactively prevent the same thing happening to them? But we'll follow up with the longer question of what is being done to claw back those rights that we lost in New Mexico. So first question is, what can other states do to kind of proactively prevent what you're going through now? And then we'll cover the, how are we starting to claw back those rights in New Mexico?
First and foremost, if you're a trapper, no matter what state you're in, first and foremost, join your state trappers association. That's who's fighting. That's your boots on the ground. That's the first guys, that's your Army Rangers. That's the guys moving in and the first ones to start fighting the fight. If you're on Facebook and things happen, ugly things happen, unintentionally, whatever, don't post that crap on Facebook. You're not helping us. Some of the things I see people post is just ridiculous. Those 2 things are extremely important. Learn from somebody who's an ethical trapper and can teach you the right way to do things. Like I said, you're going to have incidental catches. The good thing about a foothold trap, you walk up, you put your catch pole on them, and you release them unharmed. I've done it many times. So yeah, one of our biggest problems as trappers is, and I think it's happened for far too long. Um, we've let the antis tell our story for years and years and years, and it's way past time for trappers to tell trappers stories.
Yep, I
So
agree, and I think that's where having these open conversations is an important aspect of it, especially as um, I was speaking with one of the government affairs gentlemen from Oregon Trappers Association, and he was saying out of all the licensed trappers in that state, only a small handful are members of the association, like under 20% statewide. And to your point, you can join these associations and help fight the fight. But I have a follow-on question for you there, and I think it's a question I had as a new trapper. I think a lot of trappers have. What is that money actually going to? So let's say we spend $30, $40 to join an association. You can join another state's association. Like, if you're in New York, you can join New Mexico Trappers Association,
sure,
but maybe help break down where that money goes to help these fights.
and it basically helps us pay the bills to keep the doors open. You have to have people on the front line in an organization to help you fight this fight. And we did. Our board members were phenomenal when it came to that. We were up till I remember going to sleep at 11:30 every night, writing emails and to senators, and then waking up at 5:30 in the morning to go to work. And I did it for 65 days straight. And our board did the same thing. So that's what your money's going to. It's going to lobbyists. It's going to help us fight the fight, get the word out.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah,
And yeah,
like our first sale, the money we get from that, we just keep it in our coffers. And when it comes time, I'm paying fuel, motels for board members to go to Santa Fe and stay in rooms so they can go to the legislature, testify in person. My wife's done it. My son's done it. My son did it when he was 11. So it goes to that, helps them pay for fuel. And that's another thing, kind of another side note. When we lost trapping, we were in the height of COVID. So we were not allowed to go to Santa Fe and testify at the roundhouse. Actually, the governor built a fence all the way around it to make sure people stayed out. So everything we got to do was over Zoom. And one of the main senators, the main senator that introduced the bill, when I was testifying over Zoom towards the end, it was right before they were going to do the final tally. I got maybe a sentence and a half out, and he just cut me off. There was a senator here, Gail Armstrong. She was set to testify when they did the final vote, and they just skipped her. So, they kind of got to do whatever they wanted to. And of course, using the pandemic as an excuse. My opinion.
Yeah. I mean, well, you see it firsthand. So with taking the longer question now of what is being done, like what is New Mexico Trappers Association? What are a lot of these organizations who are supporting you? And I have a little slide I can pull up to show everybody that's helping in this fight. But what does it look like right now? What state bill is out there? What are we doing to claw it back? Is it a clawback? Is it a whole new bill being introduced? Maybe talk us through where the fight is right now.
So right now the fight is we have a lawsuit filed against the state. And the basis of the lawsuit is like when I was telling you about the Native Americans being able to trap on our public lands and for religious purposes, and no one else gets to. Well, that obviously violates. I think we counted 4 constitutional amendments, so they are violating the Constitution based mainly on religion. So, and I keep waiting for it. I'm sure somebody's going to end up saying we're doing it because we're racist. It has absolutely nothing to do with race. It's about religion. It's exactly the same as saying that a Catholic can go trap on public land, but a Protestant can't. Well, we know that wouldn't fly, but it's exactly the same thing. 100% exactly the same thing. So that lawsuit is filed in federal court. It's been about 3 months since there's been any action on it. The last action was, of course, a motion to dismiss, which we knew was coming. So myself, Wayne Derrick, Travis Chilson, the three of us wrote declarations, basically kind of from three different perspectives, to stop the dismissal, and so far it has not been dismissed. So that's a good sign. We're not. It's been pretty quiet here lately, but so far so good. If it does end up getting dismissed, then we will refile it in state court at that point. But I should also mention this is a joint lawsuit. It's not just New Mexico Trappers Association. The National Trappers Association, along with their lawyer, Gary, he's the lead counsel on this. We also have counsel in the state of New Mexico, and Fur Takers of America is also. It's a three-way joint deal on this. So whenever you donate to, or if you donate to the lawsuit, it goes into a joint account. So myself and both the presidents, NTA and FTA, we get statements every time. So a lot of transparency there.
And for those who are watching on YouTube right now, you'll see that Chance and I look very official, almost like we're on a news channel. We have a little ticker going across the bottom with an address of where you could send donations for the joint NTA New Mexico lawsuit. I'll also put that in the show notes for anybody who's wanting to donate stuff. And Chance, I'm going to make an assumption here, but any amount helps, right? Like, it doesn't matter if it's $5 or $5 million, like whatever you're able to put towards this, run by NTA largely with New Mexico Trapper Association, Fur Takers of America, to help get these rights back, is beneficial, correct?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. Actually, you said exactly what I've said. $5 helps. 50. It all helps. Every penny gets us that much closer to getting this lawsuit paid for.
And I have a list here. I'm going to pull it up. I don't know if this is directly correlated to the lawsuit or not, but this is a list of different associations, clubs, and people can read through this if you're on the YouTube, but there's a whole lot of people behind you guys in your effort to try to get these rights back, because this does dovetail and affect other industries like the hunting industry, or even the fishing industry to a certain extent. Is that right?
That is right. That list is the people who jumped on board and helped us fight during the legislative process. And yes, some of them have donated some pretty big sums of money to the cause, as well as quite a few state organizations. So yeah, that was the coalition we built for 2 years before this that legislative session where we lost it.
Got it. So yeah, a lot of things behind the scenes that happened leading up to the loss, and then behind the scenes leading up to trying to get it back. And the other thing I wanted to pull up here too is another picture. This is a picture of New Mexico, right? Like the outline of New Mexico, and everything that's yellow is public land, which is what this bill, Senate Bill 32, is banning trapping on. And I think anybody with eyeballs can see that is, what did you say, 60+% of land?
It's about 68% of the state. Yeah.
So I mean, it is an absolute humongous amount of people.
Yeah, the state of New Mexico is 77 million acres, so that'll give you a pretty good perspective.
And I think, the one thing that I've, in the last 2 years, being more involved with associations and my newer journey into trapping, is that you see the levee starting to break, right? We talk about California in the 90s and now New Mexico in the 2020s, and as the water starts to flow out, we don't have beavers necessarily building it back quick enough, and we need more beavers workers helping us rebuild that dam to keep these rights intact. So, a pretty good analogy there, I think. But any help
Yeah,
people can give is going to be vital.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Another thing, if you don't want this to keep going and become a nationwide ban, we have to get young people involved. Kids have to kids have to learn what real life is. We live in such a watered down society these days. And it goes back to what I was saying about us being divorced from our agricultural roots. These kids that grow up on ranches, they're always, it seems like they're always successful. They always do good in life, I think it's because of how they're raised, how I was raised. We if we want to keep this going, we have to work at it. It's nothing's going to be given to us. That's for sure. We have to put in the work.
And I will. I'll shed a little bit of positivity on this conversation. This is my objective view as somebody who came from corporate America, corporate drone, ripped up my family, moved to the middle of nowhere to learn to better hunt, trap, and do all these different things that I now, value in my life for teaching those hard lessons that I used to only get through sports. But I think there is a shift in the nation. Like you see it like in younger generations, the millennials, the Gen X, where I think the veil, especially with COVID, really was pulled down to show everything is brittle, right? And you're going to have to be able to do a little bit of self-sufficiency if you want to survive long term, because things will break down eventually, with the support system that we've all relied on. Like if you go to the grocery store and there's no meat, what happens? And that was a
Yeah,
triggering moment for
yeah,
me.
yep.
And I think we're going that way. And I think we need to, as a trapping community, welcome new people. Like I know it's always hard. You don't want to get
Oh,
animals.
absolutely,
You don't want animals to
absolutely.
get trap shy or anything, but we have to be open to people coming in and learning.
Yeah, no, you are 100% right. And it's funny. My granddaughter, she's an extremely intelligent young lady, straight A student, and she is a girly girl. But she showed an interest in trapping, so she started running with me on my trap line. She had just turned 10 years old, and she had saw where I'd caught some things, and I had some smaller traps, some number twos or whatnot that she could set. And actually, my wife's the one that taught her how to set them. My wife's a great coyote trapper too. So she was showing her how to set them, and she caught a few coyotes. And you could tell the interest was there. But the funny thing is where we were trapping, the ranch foreman told me he had a calf killed in the pen right next to the house, and he had drug it out a little ways to the dead pile. And so I saw it as a teaching moment, and we went out there, and we had to go right by that dead pile to go out to my line anyway. And I stopped and got out and showed her that dead calf, and showed her the bite marks, how a coyote kills a calf. It was maybe a 2-day-old calf. And that's when I saw the fire. That's
Mm-hmm.
when she knew why we were doing what we were doing. you know, and the rancher that I trapped on that ranch for, I think this is the 11th year now, and the quail population, the deer population, it's not just the cattle that I'm there to protect, but everything else thrives too. You see healthier coyotes now. There's way more bobcats than there used to be. It's just overall better.
And I think,
For those that don't believe it, it's there. I've seen it with my own eyes.
and I'll add what I think my understanding of probably one of the biggest misconceptions about trapping is, in my eyes, is that it's for, I mean, there's an element of sportsmanship to it, sure, but trappers tend to be some of the biggest hearted people from an animal perspective, from the animal they might even be pursuing. Like you mentioned, you don't want to see a coyote with mange. You don't want to see a raccoon with rabies. Like, you
Right.
want to control these numbers to help them
Yeah.
thrive as much as they can. And I think most trappers really do value that.
Myself, I believe this wholeheartedly. Nobody has more respect for a coyote than a coyote trapper. And I'm sure that's true with wolf trappers as well. Anything you pursue, you develop a respect for them. If you're an elk hunter, you learn, you study the animal you're after, and thereby you gain respect for them. Yeah, and that's the thing. You hear a lot of people say, "Well, kill them all," especially when it comes to coyotes. Well, the government tried to do that for 30 years and didn't get it done. So the Native Americans will tell you the last things left on the earth will be cockroaches and coyotes, and they're right. I agree with them, but I don't ever want to live in a place where at sunset I don't hear coyotes howling.
Yeah. It's one
I've
of those
never
things.
lived anywhere where I didn't hear that, and I don't want to.
Yeah. The sounds of nature too. It's not like you ever want to erase anything. It's a respect and a regulation and a doing it in a meaningful way. But, another question I have for you, multi-generational trapper, you're talking about working with your granddaughter right now. That's amazing. You worked with your dad. His dad was a trapper. Being a podcast that is geared a little bit towards people who might be trap curious, right? They're curious about trapping. They're curious about the lifestyle and might be interested in exploring it as a hobby or maybe a profession. What advice would you give someone who's maybe not quite gotten to starting in trapping, but is, wanting to potentially pursue it?
As far as I know, every state trappers organization has a rendezvous, and pretty much, as far as I know, again, and I'm speaking for New Mexico, I know Arizona, Texas, that they're all the same way. When you go to their rendezvous, you have experienced lifelong trappers doing demonstrations for you. And especially if you're a young person, they're going to flock to you like bees to honey. Because we want to see young people involved in trapping. So any questions you have, go ask them. The only stupid question is the one you don't ask. So go to your state trappers association rendezvous. Go talk to experienced trappers. That's who you want to learn from. Those are the guys that do it the right way. They're efficient. They put up big numbers. They know what they're doing, and they can guide you in the best direction possible so that you don't make mistakes. Beginner mistakes are one of the biggest things that can get trapping banned in your state, and it's not somebody doing it on purpose. It's just an honest mistake. And yeah, I mean, learn from somebody that knows what they're doing. And state trappers organizations have great rendezvous with great people there to teach you and put you on the right track.
Perfect.
The first rendezvous I went to, it's probably been 15 years ago, and I had been back at trapping for a while. It may have been longer than that. The older I get, the worse I am with timetables. But um, when I went to the New Mexico rendezvous, a guy named Wayne Derrick, a lot of trappers know who he is. I'd say he's one of the top 5 coyote men in the nation. He was there doing demos, and my biggest regret on that is I didn't bring a notebook, because when I left, my head was swimming.
Yeah, it's an ocean, right? You know, as somebody who's been trapping for close to 5 or 6 years now, I go to some of these demos or I meet people who've been doing it so much longer than I have. And like you said, it will blow your mind in a lot of instances when you talk to somebody who's either taken to a specific species or works in a different area than you and has a different technique. It really is eye-opening, the amount of wealth of knowledge that's out there. But to your point, if you're new, you have to go seek it. And part of that, you know, everybody will make mistakes, but some of the mistakes that might be made that could be detrimental to trapping, you want to avoid as a new trapper. But with that, one of the 2 questions I ask everybody on the show as we get closer to wrapping up here, Chance, can you remember what the biggest mistake you ever made on your trap line was? And then also what the biggest mistake you ever made in your first shed was?
Oh yeah. First shed, well, that's about one and the same. First year back trapping, I was in my 30s, and I did a halfway decent job of fleshing my coyotes, but I put them on wire stretchers and didn't know the correct way to do it. I know some people still use them and do a decent job. Well, I didn't. It was horrible. My coyotes looked like a triangle when I took them to the first sale. So yeah, that's definitely the worst one I did in the first shed. And I guess same thing. I guess the worst mistake I made, and luckily I didn't get caught at it, but was setting traps where too many people in the public could see them when I first started coming back. And luckily I had a few coyotes shot, but nothing major. Had some coyotes shot, a few traps stolen, and lesson learned, I guess.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we were talking about before with people who are getting into it, you know, especially studying your area and talking to people who are potentially working adjacent to where you're at and understanding where there's
Sure.
a bunch of different elements like that that you need to take into consideration.
Yeah.
All right. With a few minutes left, I got 2 more questions for you, Chance. So,
Okay.
One is, how do you believe that we as a trapping community can change people's minds and perception about trapping?
Get out in the public. My wife and I set up booths a lot, the NMTA booths, and we just did an outdoor expo not long ago. If there's outdoor expos, fairs, wherever you can get in, go set up a booth. As a 501c3, we usually get a good rate. Sit down and talk to people. Let people know. Like I said, there's a lot of resources, and there's along with the bad, there's a lot of good stuff on Facebook too. There's a lot of guys on YouTube that are doing good things and promoting trapping in a good way.
Awesome. And then the last thing that I always like to end these shows with is a hypothetical question for you. This is going to be a tough one, so hear me out.
Okay.
Would you rather be able to get trapping rights back to New Mexico trappers, but you alone have to relive the day that the rights were stripped every day, just like that movie Groundhog's Day, for 1 year? Or would you rather get trapping rights back to New Mexico trappers, but you give up the ability to do any ranching for the next 5 years? Either way, you're a hero is the good thing.
No matter what, whatever I had to do getting trapping back for New Mexico trappers. I would do the Groundhog Day for a year, and it was horrible. It was, no lie. Yeah, it felt like a family member died that day.
Yeah, it was. Actually, you mentioned him earlier, but Travis Chilson, he and I had chatted about something, and similarly, going in the veins of like social media, like what you share, what you don't share. We were talking about something that I had shared, and we were kind of going back and forth on it a little bit. And he said something to me that has now stuck with me, and it was just like, until you personally hear the words "motion past," you'll never understand it.
Yeah, he's
And
right.
yep. And I
Yeah,
think for people to take away from this too is it can come. And you guys were fighting it for a long time, but maybe never thought it would actually come. And then that day where the gavel hit and it said motion passed and you're stuck with
by
your
one
hands in the
vote,
air.
one single
Yeah.
vote. And we had 2 Republican senators vote against us, and one of them argued hard for us and then turned around and voted against us. It was crazy, like the Twilight Zone.
Well, I mean, I hate to end the podcast on such a downer of a note, but I think it's pertinent that people understand that motion pass sentence could be coming to where you're at. We need to do everything we can as a community to support you guys in getting those rights back, but also being cautious about, the same thing happening elsewhere and that dam or that levee continuing to break. But with that, Chance, where can people find out more information? Like, obviously in the show notes, we'll have the address if people want to make a donation to the lawsuit. I've got a link to New Mexico Trappers Association, but are there any parting words you want to share with people about trapping in general and what they can do to help us in this long-term fight?
Yeah, just do everything in a positive way. Everything in a positive way. Don't ever, and don't bash other trappers. I hate that. And you see it a lot on trappers forums and stuff like that on Facebook. Especially with beginning trappers and being snotty to them, that you're going to lose people that way, and that's the last thing we need. You know, Trapping, like I said, without youth and trapping, we're going to die of old age. Get kids involved, and everything you do it in a positive way.
Yep. I think nothing could be said better. Like, put out positive, I hate to say the word vibes, but positivity in everything you're doing and the trapping and the people you're mentoring, the people you're interacting with online. Like, show that we're a good community, because we are. We're a community of people who care about animals. We're people who care about our history and where we're coming from and where we're going to go as a trapping community. So with that, Chance, genuinely thank you, not just for coming on the show, but for being that positive light in trapping and being positive in the face of even losing trapping rights, and showing people that we can still hold things together even in the face of the absolute worst case scenario. So thank you. I'll put everything in the show notes, and everybody, stick around for another episode of the Okayest Trapper Podcast.
Thanks, amigo.